I don't think there is anything quite like nostalgia when it comes to drawing the fans of indie games, and there has been a constant trend in this regard. You will come across several indie horror slashers that have the perfect blend of retro arcade vibes. The idea behind these games is to combine the classic slasher horror elements with retro arcade aesthetics, which includes things like 8-bit music, neon colors, and pixel art, all to drive home the nostalgia. Even the story setup and the animation style is largely inspired by the arcade design, and many of these indie horror games have developed a decent fan following. In this video, I will take you through some of the memorable ones in this genre that will take you down the memory lane. Christmas Massacre 2021. This 2021 slasher horror game is developed by Puppet Combo, and in 2023, it was released on Xbox console. The game narrative starts off in the year 1959 in a Catholic school, where a nun tells Larry that he is not allowed to come to the Christmas party. However, Larry ignores the command and injures the nun with a knife and goes on a slaughtering spree. Then, after 20 years, Larry lives in his house, and he is told by a Christmas tree that many people have been naughty this year and they need to be punished. He dresses up as Santa and drives out to the specific house, where he kills all the members. The tree praises his act and tells him that there are more people who must die. After a blood-soaked killing spree, Larry is finally ambushed by the cops, and he is convicted of 36 counts of first-degree murder. He is sent to a mental institution where he goes on another murderous rampage as the game ends. If you think that the storyline is creepy and bizarre, wait till you experience the gameplay where you have to take control of Larry and head to specific locations to kill people. It requires a level of strategy to get the job done, and the main weapon remains a kitchen knife until a flamethrower is handed for the final night. The vintage arcade vibe across the gameplay is hard to miss, and if you have the stomach for all the violence and gore, then the game is definitely worth your time. Deadly Night 2022. This survival horror game endured its fair share of controversy, and you can find the original censored version on Steam, while the uncensored edition is exclusively on itch.io. As for the story, it has the typical slasher horror traits, and starts off with a young woman named Carol who comes to a motel to stay for the night. She is first met with the strange owner, Mr. Shiny, and soon terrible nightmares and traumatic experiences like spotting a camera in the shower make her stay difficult. Later, she finds out that Mr. Shiny has been killed brutally, and she is taken in captive by the psycho killer. There are some other versions of the storyline depending on the decision-making, but it largely remains a narrative dependent on her nightmares and horrid experiences. I don't think it would be wrong to say that Deadly Night by Cubite Games is actually a sleazy horror game that comes with PS1 graphics and several slasher tropes. There is not much variety when it comes to the gameplay, and the best part of it is probably when Carol has to evade the killer as he stalks the halls. The game ran into some trouble because of some adult scenes and morbid violence, and I don't find much replayability in this game, even though it can be enjoyable for the first couple of times. Let's just say it is a lo-fi brain candy for those seeking a guilty pleasure, and if you are a fan of the old school graphics, you might just try this one out. Murder House 2020. This horror game by Puppet Combo was originally released for Microsoft Windows back in 2020, and it later came for PS4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. The story is rather unnerving, where a TV news crew travels to the abandoned house of the infamous Easter Ripper serial killer in order to film a documentary on him. He was a notorious child killer, and later he was handed a death sentence. As the crew begins filming, they soon realize to their horror that the psycho killer is still out there, and clearly, the real Easter Ripper had not been punished for his crimes. Can they survive the experience as the Easter Ripper picks them up one by one? Puppet Combo is not a novice when it comes to horror game, and they earlier worked on Babysitter Bloodbath, which is regarded as the spiritual successor of this one. The inspiration behind Murder House clearly came from the original PlayStation-era video games and 1980s slasher films released on VHS for its aesthetic presentation. Even the music is typical old-school stuff, and games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil have clearly inspired Murder House. The low-poly graphics and strange camera angles actually furthered the scary bits of the ambiance, and the creepy vibe of the game is worth checking out. Nun Massacre 2022. The game was originally developed back in 2018, and it also went by the name Night of the Nun. I love how the narrative discloses nothing about the origin story of the primary antagonist, the titular nun. She lives on the premises of an abandoned Catholic boarding school in an unknown mountainous location in the US, and she stalks Mrs. McDonnell, who is searching for her missing daughter, Jane, in the school. It all starts off as she goes to pick up her daughter, who has reportedly fallen ill at her boarding school, but things take a terrifying turn once she is blocked along the way because of a nasty storm, and then all hell breaks loose as the nun is introduced. I don't think there is anything that can really prepare you for this PS1-style stealth horror game with 5th-gen graphics. The game has developed a decent popularity, and you will find loads of YouTube videos on the gameplay. The jump scares are unforgettable, and if you have a knack for picking up the super scary games, this might be right up your alley. Personally, I don't like the fact that the game has no checkpoints or saves, and the progression can be a tad bit obtuse. You have to replay it a few times to get the hang of things, but such minor flaws are all tolerable if you consider the spooky factor. Stay Out of the House 2022. I haven't come across a more realistic serial killer escape simulation, and Stay Out of the House steals the show with the innovative concept. The story picks up with the player having been kidnapped and held captive in a cannibal butcher's house. You are about to become food for the vicious killer very soon, and the only chance you might have is to escape from this perilous situation. This is yet another indie classic from Puppet Combo, and even though the full game was made available in 2022, the short prelude called Night Shift was released back in 2018. Many have termed this as one of the best Puppet Combo games ever, and they are not really exaggerating. The storyline might sound familiar, especially how the game begins with a broken down car in the middle of nowhere and a creepy house nearby. However, things soon take a major turn, and the butcher stalking you for his next meal makes it insanely interesting. There are numerous traps throughout the house that you have to avoid as you try to stay alive, and one has to work around different small puzzles to progress in the game and outsmart the killer. If your heartbeat doesn't go through the roof while playing this game, you are a real gangster yourself. Night at the Gates of Hell 2022. This survival zombie horror game was developed by Jordan King and Henry Hoare, and it was published by Torture Star Video. The graphic and violent nature of the game is evident from the way things begin, where a woman's torso is ripped apart by ravenous zombies, and you know that Night at the Gates of Hell is not just playing around. When the real story begins, you will find yourself playing as David, a guy who is stuck in his apartment as the undead unleash their reign of terror. Can he set things up with the other survivors? and escape the unending hell of zombie terror? I like the linear approach when it comes to the storytelling of this game, and the entire thing is spread out across 7 chapters and various environments. The main focus of the gameplay remains in accumulating ammunition for the guns and then blowing the zombie heads off, which makes it fairly simple, really. You have to be a good shot because the zombies only go down with a shot to their head, and the strategic approach is probably the heart of this game. The graphics and overall retro vibe of the gameplay is purposely done to drive home the nostalgia, and it is mission successful in this regard. Overall, this game is quite the diversion from the norms of zombie games, and anyone who hasn't played this is missing out on a hidden gem. The Closing Shift 2022. There is something about Japanese horror productions that make you remember the story ideas for a long time. The Closing Shift is one such Japanese horror game that uses a narrative that delves into the dark side of Japanese culture, where stalking and other perversions are observed in some cases. The protagonist of the gameplay is a young woman who works at a store called Chilla's Coffee. With time, however, she starts to feel that there is someone stalking her, and the sense of uneasiness starts to grow steadily. There are some fans of the game who have theorized that there are actually 2 stalkers involved in the game, and they are both preying on the main character. In fact, there are some compelling pieces of evidence that point to the same, but I also feel that there is actually just one stalker at play, and the confusion is deliberately created in the gameplay. Anyone who tries this game will get the genuine feeling of getting stalked and creeped out, and the psychological horror makes this one stand out. The old school graphics and mysterious storyline make this a compelling game for all video game enthusiasts, and you simply cannot ignore this indie classic. Fear the Spotlight 2024. Blumhouse and horror go hand in hand, and their first video game is one to remember just like their cinematic works. The biggest name in Hollywood horror in today's time have come up with a classic that stars Amy and Vivian, who are 2 high school friends who sneak around school after hours as the game begins. They soon unravel a shady side of the school's history, and the 3 to 4 hour campaign captures the horror of it all. Can they survive the nightmarish experience and emerge out of this alive, or does the gameplay sacrifice them in the end? The game uses PS1 style aesthetic like many others in this video, and that takes nothing away from the terrifying experience that the game delivers. There are no major combat mechanics to speak of, and this makes it more of an adventure horror game than survival horror. You cannot really fight the monster at the heart of this dark story, and the only chance you have is to sneak under the classroom desks and avoiding its gaze while solving some puzzles along the way. I can assure you that the combination of old and new horror game design will not disappoint the OG gamers, and Fear the Spotlight is something that you ought to try out. Crow Country 2024. This unique survival horror game by SFB Games is a nice reminder of some of the earlier horror classics, and the narrative is set in 1990. You take control of Mara Forrest, a special agent who comes to Crow Country, which is an abandoned rural amusement park near Atlanta, Georgia. It had shut down 2 years ago, and the founder disappeared mysteriously. Mara searches for him, and she comes across a paranormal photographer who warns her about some dangerous creatures around. With time, Mara Forrest unravels the sinister secrets of Crow Country, and the gameplay is bound to give you the chills. The graphics and designs of the game are clearly inspired by the survival horror games that were released for the PlayStation during the 1990s, and this includes titles like Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2. Some aspects of the character models and environments have been modeled after Final Fantasy VII, 1997. Even the puzzles resemble those of the retro game, and it is a blast from the past in every sense of the term. It does not come as a surprise that the game generally received positive reviews, and critics have appreciated the game's narrative and writing more than anything. Hollow Body, 2024. Here, we have a tech-noir survival horror short story that is set in the urban decay of a long-abandoned British city. The game's vaguely Blade Runner futuristic UK has a cyberpunk vibe that I find intriguing, and everything from the environments, the puzzles, and the sense of danger add to the charm of the gameplay. The cutting desolation often gets to you as you move through the series of puzzle-themed obligation. The game involves the player's psychological strength, as you will be all alone and stranded with limited resources to push through the challenging terrain by solving environmental puzzles. I wouldn't want to spoil things for you, but let's just say that both the end boss and the ending of the game are so good that I was amazed by the creativity. Those who are looking for a creative indie horror that can be finished in a few hours, the search ends here. The retro arcade vibes of the game only make it more appropriate as the game does take you down the memory lane, and I wish more developers come up with games like Hollow Body in the future. Like Clay, 2023. I have a special place in my heart for adventure games with horror element, and Like Clay delivers on that perfectly. The story picks up as the player Jim Stevens is investigating the case of his missing friend and ex-fellow student Tom Keemer. Tom had been struggling with his life after losing his job and his girlfriend and his home, but what really caused him to go missing? He did send a last message where he spoke about things working out again, and you have to decipher the mystery through the hints and messages and puzzles left behind. Once again, it is the innovation of the gameplay that stands out, and the idea is pretty solid. The graphics and gameplay style is a reminder of some PS1 classics, and even though there is sometimes a crude feel about the visuals, it is negligible if you consider the heritage factor. I love how it makes one feel like a detective at times, even though some serious dangers lurk around, and if you make it through the entire gameplay, you will know that Like Clay definitely deserves more recognition. Bloodwash, 2021. The story of an indie horror game rarely gets more campy than Bloodwash, and I don't think it would have looked right without the typical low-poly graphic. The gameplay introduces Sarah, a pregnant college student who lives with her alcoholic boyfriend in a rundown apartment. As if the situation wasn't scary enough already, there is a psychopath serial killer running loose who targets pregnant women. This killer, named the Womb Ripper, is out to get Sarah as well, unless she finds a way to save herself, even under such extreme circumstances and limited resources. This game offers a surprising amount of depth for a genre that has plenty to offer and far too much competition. It comes from the star of the indie industry, Puppet Combo, and the game is clearly inspired by giallo horror film. The deeply disturbing narrative is not for the faint-hearted, and the old-school PS1 graphics will not please everyone either. You might come for the story, but you will stay for the overall experience in this haunting serial killer drama. Marvelous verdict. Indie horror deserves to be taken seriously. Every serious video game lover will know that I have a serious point here, and the innovation of some of these indie horror games will tell you exactly why the genre needs to be taken seriously. They often go unnoticed among the big budget names, but the creativity is right up there among the best in business. Also, the recent trend of some unexpectedly good indie horror gems have increased the craze behind the genre, and I see great potential in the near future as big brands like Blumhouse are also drawn into the mix. All in all, it is a promising time for those who love innovation in their games, and the coming years might just hold some amazing gifts for them. Do let me know in the comments below which one of these games are your favorites, and also tell me about some upcoming indie games that you are excited about.